Hi, it's Emily Leiphart of Art from the Heart, and in this video I'll be showing you how to make 3 types of shaker cards with Paper Smooches stamps and dies. Over the winter, my son asked his dad to make him a card before he left on a business trip. My husband made the hamster card because that's our son's favorite from Party Posse. I did the die cutting and helped with the assembly since this was his first time making a shaker card, but my husband picked out everything and colored in the hamster. We used scallop frames dies, ovals dies, Party Posse and Posse Icons dies, snowflakes dies, and the sentiment is from Salutations. Needless to say, our son absolutely loved the card, and while his dad was away, he wanted to make a shaker card to surprise his dad when he came back. He wanted to use the same papers that his dad had used on his card. We used Chains dies, Borders 1 dies, and my son colored in the images from Royal Cuteness and Royal Icons. He even picked out all the white sequins that represent snow. My family loves shaker cards, so I'm going to inspire you to make some of your own. Before I start with real shaker cards, I'm going to share this faux shaker bookmark that I made a few months ago using the Crystal Clear 1 and 2 dies. If I had placed foam tape between the 2 layers, the hearts dies would have been free to move around. But since this had to be flat to fit inside a book, I had to keep it completely flat. It was created in the style of shaker cards with an acetate window, but the hearts aren't glued down and they don't move either. That's why I'm calling this a faux shaker. Okay, so moving on to my 3 examples of shaker cards. I'm first starting with a white card base and the dual die 2 as the frame for the shaker part. If there's an important rule for shaker cards, it's that you always need some kind of border or frame for the adhesive to form a wall around the shaker elements. I'm going to make the frame a deep purple color, and I'm going to stamp the images inside the oval part of the frame. So that means I have to die cut it twice, once in purple and once in white. The base layer is a bit too plain for my liking, so I'm going to dry emboss it with candy stripes. As always, you can find shopping links to all the supplies I use in the wording below this video or on my blog. Now I'm going to stamp the partygoers using Zoo Crew and add a sentiment from TikTok. First, I'm going to create a mask for the party hat. Then I'm going to choose the animals and gauge their positions around the oval. I'm going to bend the giraffe's neck slightly before stamping. I place the mask of the party hat onto the oval before stamping. After removing the mask, I can stamp the hat in Hero Arts green chalk ink. Then I use a Copic multi-liner to fill in where there's a gap between the original stamped image and the masked image. After stamping the zebra and camel, I can stamp the sentiment. I use the die cut frame to help me get the curve right. I use washi tape to mask off half of the sentiment so I can stamp it on 2 lines. Now I'm going to quickly color in the images with Copic markers. As always, I use 3 shades of each color. I start by coloring the entire image with the lightest shade, then use the medium shade to add shadowing and the darkest shade for more definition. Then I go back over the entire image with the lightest shade to blend all the colors together. All my stamping and coloring is now done, so I can prepare to assemble the shaker part of the card. I use a Tim Holtz design ruler to measure the length and width of the frame so I can trim a piece of acetate for it. I always wipe off any dust or prints with a tissue so the window is perfectly clean on both sides. I use score tape to hold the acetate to the frame because it's super strong and I definitely don't want it coming apart on the recipient. After peeling off the backing, I can adhere the acetate to the frame. In this case, because the corners of the frame are notched, I actually have to trim the corners that are hanging off the edge. I've made a lot of shaker cards and this is the first time I've had to do this, so don't worry about having this extra step all the time. Now I'm going to create a wall with foam tape around the window. This is what will contain the sequins. This may look tedious, but it's not. Trust me, I've done it so many times that I don't even think about it anymore and the process goes really fast. If you choose square or rectangular frames, you don't have to worry about this, and you'll see how quick and easy this step becomes in my next two cards. To gauge the position of the centerpiece, I'll apply adhesive, then hold it in position and place both pieces down. Sometimes I have to do a shift before pressing it down permanently. I use a couple of acrylic blocks to hold the card flat before choosing sequin colors. Even though the sequins are going to move around, I methodically place them around the edge of the oval to make sure that there are just enough. When I'm ready to adhere the frame, I push them toward the center so they don't get trapped underneath the foam adhesive. As I'm removing the backing from the tape, I decide that I need a few more sequins. Once the frame is in place, my card is done. I love that the zebra is almost completely covered up by the sequins. It's like he's the surprise guest who's revealed when the sequins move. Moving on to the next card. I'm using patterned papers from Crepe Paper Style Board Paper Pad. I've chosen 3 papers for the background scene as well as for paper piecing the animals. My card base is 6 by 3¼ inches, and I also have a front panel that I'll be adhering the patterned paper to. I have to do it this way to make the window frame more substantial. I'm using the Digits dies to make my cousin's son a 4th birthday card. It's the number 4 that will be the shaker part of this card, and first I have to separate that die from the rest of them with wire snips. Next I'm going to use the Borders 1 dies to create a hill from the herringbone wood grain paper. Then I'm going to trim the sky paper for use behind the hills. I adhere the sky to the white panel, but I'm not sure about the height of the hills. I want to position the other elements on the card first. The number 4 will go right in the middle, and the hippo and alligator will flank it. Once again I'm using the Zoo Crew stamp set and stamping them on coordinating Zoo Crew dies. I'm paper piecing the animals, and these big flowers will provide the perfect colors and details for them. Before I proceed, I just want to make sure that the stamps themselves will fit into the layout. I'm fussy cutting away the areas that I want to stay white, and the base dies themselves will provide that part. These would be the eyeballs, teeth, nails, and scales. I use my Zig glue pen to adhere the pattern paper to the base die and use a white gel pen to color in areas that should be white but could not be easily cut away. For the hippo's tongue I wanted another contrasting color, and I'm choosing the pretty yellow. This is where I decide that the hill is too high, so I trim a bit off the bottom before adhering it to the panel. Now that all the proportions are right, I position the 4 die with masking tape and run it through my big shot. When it's done, I flip it over and apply a score tape frame around it. Once again, I measure the size so I don't waste any acetate. For this card, I cut 2 pieces of acetate the same size, and you'll see why in a minute. Once again, I wipe away any dust and prints, then apply one of the pieces of acetate and set the other aside. Then I create the foam tape wall, which will contain the shaker part of the card. Since I'll be using microbeads this time, I have to make sure there are no tiny gaps where they can escape. I flip the panel back over to look at the colors of the card. This helps me choose the microbead colors. While the card is still flat, I'm going to do my stamping on the front panel. Now I can fill the shaker part with the microbeads. On the first card with sequins, I place the sequins on the card base and place the frame on top. Since I'm using tiny microbeads, I have to fill the frame while it's still upside down, so the foam walls keep them contained. I include more of the two colors that match the animals and a bit of blue to go with the sky. Now I remove the backing from the foam tape and place the second piece of acetate on it. This is the secret to creating shakers with anything round that won't stay in one place. You can move this panel around now without worrying about the shaker part. I apply foam tape to the rest of the panel so I can adhere it to the card base. The 4 is not complete without that little triangle, so I'm going to use the positive to make sure that the position is correct before applying some glossy accents and pushing it down on the acetate. Since it slides around before it dries, I use a baby wipe to clean up any unwanted glue. During that time, the pattern paper layer has separated from the white cardstock, so I also have to adhere that. Now it's clearly a 4, and I can adhere the animals to the card with glue dots. Now my second card is done. Moving on to the third and final card. I've already used sequins and microbeads, and now, you guessed it, I'll be using dies inside the shaker of this card. I've die cut stars from foil cardstock using the stars dies. These stars are seriously amazing. My clear favorite is this 4-in-1 die with the 2 thin edges. You could leave this die cut as it is, all assembled, or you can separate them in several different ways. I really love the 2 thin outline stars because they look like metal embellishments. For the shaker frame, I'll be using the Bam Bubble die. This chalkboard superhero paper from Crepe Paper's Boys Rule paper pad will provide the perfect background for this card. Once again, since the frame needs to be more substantial, I'm adhering the pattern paper to a cardstock panel. Then I'm going to die cut the Bam Bubble from the center of it. Holding it on the card base, I don't like the white background, so I'm going to use a piece of vellum over the positive die cut that mutes the pattern just enough. Now, as with all the other shaker frames, I'm applying score tape for the acetate window. Here the foam wall is pretty straightforward. I can actually use a ruler to measure and cut the exact length I need. There are too many stars, so I'm going to remove the largest solid and outline stars. I make sure that I like how the stars look against the muted pattern before adhering it to the card base. Just like on my first card, I use the frame itself to gauge its position on the card before pressing it down permanently. Then I can place the stars just like I placed the sequins, directly in the center of the frame. I actually used too many stars in this shaker, and they don't move nearly as much as I would like. I think the vellum panel takes away space as well, so next time I will use fewer stars. To finish this card, I'm going to add the superhero from the Super Stamp set and color him to coordinate the stars in the pattern paper. When I'm ready to die cut him, whoops, I realize that the die is not a framelit but a solid die, and I can't tell if he's centered. My solution is to die cut him from a thin piece of paper and using temporary adhesive adhere that to my image while holding it up to the light to make sure it's centered over top of him. Now the die will catch the edges and sit perfectly in place so I can die cut him just right. Then I add foam tape and place him on the card. To review, I made 3 types of shaker cards. This first one has a simple frame and all the stamping takes place in the center. Sequins are what makes this card shake. My second card has a paper piece scene that surrounds the shaker, and microbeads are what makes this card shake. My third card doesn't have a sentiment, but the pattern paper speaks volumes, and die cuts are what makes this card shake. Please refer to the supply links below if you're interested in any of the products I used in this video. You can also visit my blog for stills and more information about my cards. Thanks so much for watching.